What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 start off with a much better than expected global opening. However, even though it's better than expectations, and even though the articles from Deadline and many other places will talk about how, oh hey, look how much better it's doing than what we thought it was going to be doing, it isn't by all that much. And when you especially compare this to the other Guardians films and to the other films that came out over the past year from the MCU, let's just say it's not a very strong start in comparison to those. That being said, this movie has something that many of those others, especially films like Thor 4 and Doctor Strange 2, it has something that those don't have, which is it actually has a little bit more positive word of mouth going for it than those movies did, where those movies had pretty bad word of mouth, saw massive week 1, week 2 drop-offs. I think that we'll probably still see a pretty big drop-off, probably over 60% drop for this movie. The real question is it going to be closer to that 60% drop second weekend, or is it going to be closer to the 80% drop-off that we've seen and some of the biggest drop-offs in MCU history with the most recent films to come out? So let's go ahead and dive into these numbers. As again, from Deadline, our girl Nancy has said it has rocketed, I see the joke there, to an estimated 282.1 million global opening, beating projections, which were cautious given uncertainty in Asian markets, particularly in China and Korea. This is once again a reminder that now that Bob Iger's back in charge, that's right, pretty much every single major, gigantic, big budget release coming from Disney is going to get released in China, meaning millions upon millions of dollars will be going to support the Chinese Communist Party. But again, this is indeed better than had been expected. The projections as of Saturday were around $110 million domestically, ended up making around $114 million. Those numbers could still adjust either up or down. But obviously, those are much more realistic to projections that we have seen in previous films where they're off just by a little bit of money. Clearly, this movie is not doing anywhere close to what Mario was able to do the last few weeks, where that movie was able to just, again, throw everyone for a loop, not knowing exactly what was going on with it, projecting, numbers that were changing every single day by the tens and 20s of millions of dollars. So Guardians, again, doing, a good enough job to take the number one spot, finally taken away from Super Mario Brothers movie. However, Super Mario Brothers having been out for as long as it has, it was bound to happen whenever another big budget film came out. And so it's really not all that surprising. Going into the actual numbers for the weekend domestically, as you can see, Guardians made $114 million at over 4,000 screens. It's about a $25,000 per screen ratio. So again, a pretty strong start. I know that on the opening night when I went to go see this film in IMAX, my theater was pretty packed. It was almost like we were, sardines. It was not packed to the point of previous MCU films from years past, where you had pretty much every single seat from even those side rows and those terrible seats that no one ever really wants, right? Those were still open. But as far as the main section and the main seats themselves, they were packed. And so I had not seen a film like that since I've moved actually to the Chattanooga area. And so I think that actually says a lot about why I think this film has actually a very good chance of being able to do better than what was expected. And when I show you some comparisons from this movie to the other Guardians movies, why I think that you might end up seeing this film do closer to those numbers versus the last couple years from the MCU numbers. And again, we'll get to those numbers in a second. Super Mario Brothers, though, coming in the number 2 spot, dropping 54%, the biggest drop-off for a film, rather for this film specifically, in its entire run. And as I've been mentioning for a long time now, that was bound to happen. As soon as this film had any competition, that's when you would start to see a bigger than the 20s and 30s percentage drop-offs that it had been having in the previous weeks. So it's still doing very, very well. I mean, the fact that it's only 54% after, 4 weeks or so of release is still very, very good, but it is finally being kicked out of that top spot. And based on the numbers that we're seeing here and the typical drop-offs we can expect, and also the series of films we have set to come out over the summer, Super Mario Brothers may not get back to the number 1 spot, but hey, never say never when it comes to that movie. Evil Dead Rise coming in the number 3 spot, $5.7 million, continuing to add profits for Warner Brothers. Hey, they need that. Probably why they're not taking this out of a lot of theaters. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret from Lionsgate, $3.3 million, dropping 50%. And based on the budget, it's actually not a very good number for this movie. And then a new film from Sony called Love Again. No idea what that's about, but hey, $2.4 million. Going into the individual releases, as you can see, Guardians is at $282.1 million. Comparing this film to not only the other Guardians films, but also the other and the past MCU films to come out, we're going ahead and looking and comparing first to the other Guardians movies. This is the lowest opening for any Guardians film when you adjust for inflation. And just remember that this is not taking into account current rates of inflation. Even just using the numbers' own metrics, though, as you can see, the first Guardians film adjusted made about $120 million. Guardians Volume 2 obviously had a much bigger opening at $170. This film had $114. So even though you could say that the two, right, between Volume 3 and the first movie is about a wash, when you look at those numbers. When you look at this compared to the second film, you see a huge drop-off in people. You see a huge drop-off in tickets and in bodies in the theater. Compare this to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. This film is actually doing better. And as I said, I think that word of mouth probably helped this movie, right? It wasn't that far off from where Ant-Man opened, 46 million opening day versus 48 million. But here's the Saturday, 38 versus 33, 27 versus 25. And I think those higher numbers are because of the positive word of mouth, whereas Ant-Man and the Wasp was just getting roasted over the coals, and I think that that's going to be a huge difference in just the overall success of the overall film, right? This movie, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, ended around $460 million when everything was said and done. Right now, based on the numbers I'm seeing, I think that you'll probably see Guardians 3 end somewhere in the ballpark of the $650 to $850 million range, somewhere in the range, I would say, of Thor 4 and Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. And I think this film has a lot better word of mouth than even both of those movies. And so we'll have to wait and see. It's obviously still very early, but based on the numbers that I am seeing, that seems to be a likely scenario at this point in time. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, at the same point its release, was at 181. Thor: Love and Thunder, 144. Remember that these also did not have very positive word of mouth campaigns. And so I think that might be helping this movie down the line, and why I think that it will end up actually being able to catch up to the likes of a Thor: Love and Thunder, and maybe not quite make it to a Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Again, this film, I think, did much better domestically than anyone would have thought, similar to the first film did, and I don't know necessarily if we're going to see that from this movie, but we'll have to wait and see. Super Mario Brothers at $1.1 billion now worldwide. Again, incredible numbers there. Again, pretty much almost to 1.2. I thought I had a chance of getting close to 1.2 this weekend, but really I think one of the reasons as to why it isn't is because even though it is performing somewhat in Japan, right, it's made $48.4 million there, and I know some people are going to say, well, there's still holidays and there's still numbers that haven't been added to the numbers. Again, all these things can be true. However, what this, I think the Achilles heel so far as these Asian markets is concerned, is a lot of people were saying a lot and giving a lot of talk about South Korea. Well, here's the thing. South Korea has only accounted for $13.3 million. Right? Only 13.3 million. And this is, again, has been updated as of May 7th that it's made in that country. The reason why I think that's a problem is because if you take a look at Guardians of the Galaxy, let's see if they've actually updated their numbers here. 13.6 million opening weekend in South Korea for Guardians. So Guardians is actually performing better numbers-wise versus Mario. And so that's why I think ultimately South Korea probably is not going to be a huge factor for the overall worldwide box office for Mario. But Japan still definitely has a chance, right? 48 is not a whole lot of money. But as we all have been saying this now for a while, when it comes to Japan's market week to week, those numbers are not always acting the same as it does in the North American market. You see very different kinds of drops week to week and much smaller percentage drops as well. So this film still has a lot of play in Japan based off of things that we are kind of seeing. But I'm pretty sure at this point we could say South Korea is not going to be a factor. So my prediction earlier about how I think between South Korea and Japan, you're probably looking at $200 to $250 million total from both countries combined. That seems to be playing out as a most likely scenario as far as a majority scenario. But again, things are still quite early in those actual countries. Going to the box office charting, because I love to do charting here over on Geeks and Gamers. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 at $282 million right now means it's $200 million in the red. So I have the film break even at around $625 million. Remember that I use a 2.5 times multiplier for its budget. And right now this film has a pretty big budget. Again, this is something that Disney is going to need to start to change if they're ever going to want to make money. Again, because their films clearly aren't able to drive enough people to see their movies as they once were able to, right? Even if this film is able to outdo projections, that still puts the film at barely breaking even, maybe making a little bit of profit, similar to what we saw with Thor 4 and Black Panther, right? If we take those numbers that they gave us at face value. When it comes, though, to these numbers itself, $625 million is currently the break even I have, and I know that some people probably will end up doing probably a times 3. So looking at the break even, somewhere between $625 and $700 million, I would say would be a pretty safe assessment. I think the film can do that, but it's going to have to work quite a bit, especially as we get very close to the summer box office season and more competition. The film Love Again, no idea what that is. $9 million of a production budget means its break even is 22.5, so not a great start. Maybe not, probably won't be able to do that, especially with films like Mario and Guardians taking up all of that space. Big George Foreman is set to be a flop. Sisu also actually has a pretty good chance of being a flop. It's doing a lot better than what people had expected it to do, but really no one's going to see it. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact it's not in a lot of theaters, but it's also very early. So because it did get a limited release, I'm not going to say this film is officially a flop because limited releases don't always work the same way as the big budget ones. Are You There, God's Me, Margaret? A wide release, looking like it's going to be a box office flop. Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, unfortunately, still a box office flop, though I recommend everyone go to see it because it is fantastic. And then the overall updated numbers here for Super Mario Brothers movie: $545 million in net game profit. Film well on its way to getting $600+ million in net profits, easily going to pay for 6 movies, right? If they spend $100 million, as they did on Mario, on pretty much their next 5 or 6 projects, the profits from this movie alone will pay for the next several years of project going forward. So, as I said, this is huge numbers for Mario, huge numbers for Universal, huge numbers for Illumination, and that is something for them to absolutely to be proud of. So those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts about these numbers? If you want to have fuller box office breakdown, where I talk also about John Wick Chapter 4, give an update on Nefarious and other films like that, go ahead and check me out over at OMB Reviews. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Smash that like button, lap that fire button. I'll see whatever it is that you're watching us. You're great. Have a wonderful day, everybody. As always, God bless.